Hello, everybody. My name is Jelani. And welcome to the 34th damn, episode of DeSci
This
Rising.
really 34? Oh my God.
34, man. 34. It's been 34 weeks, more or less, since we've started this, and it's crazy how far we've gotten. We're only about like halfway through the dashboard. So for those of you who
Wow.
haven't had your own episode yet, please do book a time. We'd love to have you up, showcase you. I think we're at 78 projects right now up on the DeSci World dashboard. So we have a lot more to come. DeSci is bubbling and growing very, very fast. But yes, this is episode 34 of the DeSci Rising series put on by DeSci World, where our goal here is always to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing very quickly DeSci World dashboard to just kind of formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci world and the wider DeSci community. Now, the idea behind all this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community leveraging these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we are looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industries. Now, today's episode, we have a flashback from the past, and I'll be speaking with, once again, with Jonathan Starr, who, among many, many things, is a prominent representative of the Gridcoin platform, which is, and John, you can feel free to correct me after this if I'm wrong, but Gridcoin is essentially the first science-based blockchain and open economic network that rewards volunteer computing for science through the BOINC platform, and BOINC stands for the Berkeley Open uh, Infrastructure for Network Computing, and Folding at Home, which is a protein folding platform that you can leverage at home, kind of like Rosetta at home, but for protein folding. And so, with that, welcome back, John. Glad to have you. Thank you for taking the time today to help us learn more about one of the oldest decentralized science platforms on the block.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm surprised you said boink right. I guess you've heard me say it so many times, but everyone,
So many times.
that's the hardest thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
many times.
great. A little tidbit to add really quick. Folding at home is the largest supercomputer in the world. So that's pretty neat.
Really?
Just throw that out there. Yeah. It's like
I know.
during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, it was like 2 to 3 exaflops of processing power, and I think they've kept it up at the exaflop range since then. But it was all people contributing computation cycles to their protein folding projects that were working on getting SARS-CoV-2 out of the world. Really,
That's
it got
very
huge.
that's very interesting, actually. And I want to circle back to that because, especially if the same computational power is live and present, that's very impressive because the world has kind of changed. Although I think, compute over data, decentralized computation is really taking the world by storm. I know within the DeSci space, it's popping up a lot of places, but even in traditional, leveraging unused processing power seems like one of the smartest things to do in terms of optimizing computation. But we'll get to
Dude,
that.
it's crazy.
We'll get to that,
Okay,
John.
we'll get to
Don't jump there yet.
it.
So others have heard you before. You were, I think, early on one of our first 10, within one of our first 10 episodes talking about the Science Commons Initiative. But since it's been a bit, let's reintroduce yourself. So tell me about, yourself, John. How did you get into Web3? How did you land at Gridcoin? And what you've been up to since then?
Sure. So got into, I heard about Bitcoin in 2012, late 2012, early 2013, and it's like, oh my God, these guys are making decentralized peer-to-peer cash. That sounds great. I'm coming out of the Occupy Wall Street movement and watching the government bail out banks that should have probably failed, and it's eerily similar to what's going on right now. So full circle. But when I was exploring Bitcoin, which was and still is absolutely amazing, like there's nothing wrong with it, but the thought is, okay, how do we take this and build on top of it? And so I was always into science, and I am exploring these altcoins that are popping up around that time, and one of them is Gridcoin. It's created by this like random anonymous person who calls themselves Rob Halford from Judas Priest. Obviously, it's not Rob Halford, but that's the name they chose, similar to Satoshi and Sonny King and all these great names that start these cryptos. And this Gridcoin project is looking to build on top of the Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing, which has been around since 2002, or if you want to go back to SETI at Home, which was the precursor to it, 1999. And I have done SETI, or I've done SETI, and I've done some Boink Crunchy beforehand. I'm like, oh, this is neat. I'll read a little more. And the mission behind it was really, really cool. Getting a currency that is based essentially on this distributed computing computations. These volunteers who are ultimately paying for the privilege to contribute to science, because our electricity bills are nothing to be ignored. So the idea of creating an economy system, a peer-to-peer cash that's distributed from essentially the Treasury Department, this protocol, to people doing science ultimately with their own computers. And it's the public largely that's participating here. So getting them engaged in the process, making them learn about science. So they're whitelisting the good science and not the destructive science. This just sounded like a really good idea. So I got involved, started crunching, getting some GRC. There's proof of work back then, so I did a little bit of that too during the bootstrap era. And then it really picked up in 2017. Once, what boom was that? That was just tokens at that point. Once that cycle started,
ICO phase.
the rest is history. Yeah, I see how that was it. And it's been a lot.
So
That's my journey.
I mean, that and many other things. I know right now you're plugged into a variety of DeSci projects and non-DeSci projects, whether it be DeSci Labs, DeSci Foundation. You know, you helped architect DeSci Denver, DeSci Boston. You're one of the more prominent figures in the space. At least
Yeah,
in my-
so ultimately, yeah, to speak to that, so I work for a bunch of projects. I work with a bunch of projects. I try not to work for anyone because it's a large open source environment. And Gridcoin is a very open source project. There's no positions, there's no CEO, there's no token raise, there's none of that stuff. And if there's ever a project that I personally can see like using blockchain technology, DLT, to actually change the way science is done for the better, I do everything I can to try and support it because that's what it's all about.
That's actually a really good point, right? Because oftentimes people will ask me, like, okay, well, how do you, get involved in DeSci and what does that actually mean and what is the reflection of that? And I guess I should really start shunting them to you as somebody who has his fingers in so many pots and is, talks about the fact that it's not working for an actual organization, but really working with them. And I think that nuance is very important when it comes to our space, Web3 in general, but especially our space. There's ample opportunities for people to work with this emerging market and emerging platforms and not really think about it as working for. That isn't to say that you can't, receive remuneration or receive value back in a variety of forms, but it's really, I guess, changing the mental paradigm of saying like, you know what, I'm going to work for somebody for better, like something more like I'm working with this and I'm helping grow this as a piece, one cog in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely get paid for your time and your skills like that. You don't need to sacrifice getting paid for essentially working in an open source environment, or what really boils down to working for yourself by working with a bunch of different projects. And the benefit in this space is like, first of all, you're going to learn a lot by working with different DAOs or different organizations, different crypto networks, economic networks. And the reality is most of them are going to fail over the years because this is still a very young space. And in that process, you're not tying yourself to the success of one project, but you're still meeting a bunch of people who are going to go on and make the next project and iterate on the space and the technology to eventually the point where it succeeds. You're going to learn a bunch of skills because you're going to be doing different stuff for different projects. And ultimately, you still have the freedom to choose what you value instead of being forced to build OpenAI and then watch your bosses sell it to Microsoft and make the source proprietary.
Right, exactly. And I can attest to it myself, having jumped into this space from the traditional scientific realm. The the explosion of my network in terms of participants who I can speak to, key opinion leaders who I have access to, people who I've partnered with and worked with, and just the skill sets, both soft and hard skill sets that I've been able to flex and grow in the quote unquote short period of time that I've been here has been amazing. I wouldn't trade it. I really wouldn't trade it. I thought, it was a risky jump, but it's been very fruitful. If not, there's some pitfalls, but as things are, like you
Yeah.
said, it's a new space. It's a new space. So, we're on ground floor, we're on the basement, and we'll see how it goes. So, speaking of the ability to leverage, maybe not passively, but not have to take away from what you're currently doing to help participate in DeSci. Let's talk about the Gridcoin platform. So essentially, as you mentioned, Gridcoin is a platform that rewards peoples, for contributing processing power. What does that actually mean, and how does that happen?
So you can think about it, and I always use the protein folding example. Let's go to space. Think about all the asteroids in the asteroid belt. And we want to, as a society, be able to map the path of all these asteroids so that we can determine whether or not one has, been knocked out of orbit and is now coming to Earth, going to kill us all, right? The way you can do that is measure everything, use a satellite or some sort of telescope to just collect a buttload of data, and then compute on that data, run data analysis across it, to figure out, the spin, the rotation, the speed and velocity of all these asteroids. It's just a lot of data, though, so that's the problem. But they're also unique. Each asteroid data set is unique, and you don't need to do it all in one central place. You can send different calculations out to different computers around the world so that each individual that's contributing to a giant decentralized computing network is doing a small share of it. And if you end up breaking up this massive data set, let's just say a number, let's say 100, whatever number you want there, whatever unit, you can send one out to everyone. And if you get 100 people doing one, then it just goes really, really quickly because they're doing that one at the same time as everyone else. All that computation, all the results then go back to the telescope maintainers or whoever is doing this research. And now you have the reality of the situation. You know what the asteroid spin and rotation and everything is. And it's crazy. Like folding at home, which does do the protein folding. So you can do this with a whole bunch of different problems, medicine. There's a lot of space projects, actually, math. There's one that's doing machine learning. There was one that was trying to build like the the Starship Enterprise by trying to make like automatic computers that self-heal, which was really, really cool, called the Distributed Hardware Evolution Project. Unfortunately, they ran out of funding and had to stop, but very cool project. But you can do this across a lot of different fields of science and research. And folding at home, which does it across protein folding, is like 2 or 3 exaflops, which is huge. It is the largest supercomputer in the world. But in the grand scheme of how much processing power exists in the world, it's tiny. David Anderson, who started BOINC, estimated in 2019 that there was 6,000 exaflops of processing power just existing in the world based on the machines that already exist. My desktop, your desktop, our cell phones, our smart fridge, our cars, once they have computers in them. And if we could just tap into like, I don't know, 50% of this, 60% of it when it's idle, when you're not even using it already, the amount of processing power we would have would be everything we could ever ask for as a society, especially since it scales naturally. Because like, as I get better computers to play my games, I'm going to have better GPUs to contribute to science when it's idle. As phones start to distribute around the world more globally, there's more people that can plug into this network. As smart IoT devices come online, there's even more computation. You don't need to waste resources building supercomputers for most of the research we need to do. We just need to get more people to participate. So Gridcoin said, hey, let's incentivize people with money. Let's pay them to contribute. And that's the basic premise. And it's built a strong enough community for it to exist since it started. It's never stacked, which is really, really cool.
The parallels, so the parallels between that and just the concept of the supercomputer, right? Being able to tackle the question of or the challenge of the supercomputer in 2 ways, whether you build one centralized unit that requires a lot of energy and concerted effort to make come online, whether it be cooling and has its issues, or you attack it in the other angle of, okay, well, there's all these disparate parts. There's one processing power here, 2 here, 3. But if we can mass them together, then we get the equivalence of one entity, and which is ultimately more optimal, more scalable, less downside. I think we have examples of this through Gitcoin, and to extrapolate that further, it's a lot of like that undertone is, I think, what the premise of DeSci is, right? Pulling together these loose-knit communities and participants in such a way that it helps fuel science instead of having centralized entities fueling science. And that comes with it has its pros, but it comes with its cons. If we can just distribute it across the collective hive mind of participants and resources out there, you probably get an equivalent, if not better, engine to push science forward.
Absolutely. And it definitely comes with problems. Like there are some, I mean, maybe we'll solve these problems in the future, but there are some computation problems that you just can't do in a distributed manner. You really need one central supercomputer doing it because it takes a result from like data set A and then uses that result to crunch data set B. For those who are not familiar with the lingo, crunch is just like run compute over data. It's very hard to do that type of process on a distributed network. But most things can be done in a decentralized way. And there's so many projects now working on this issue. I just came back from a compute over data conference in Boston, hosted by Protocol Labs, Baccaliao, and like 24 different projects that are working on this problem. We're probably going to find very novel ways to solve all the problems that are in distributed computing. A very obvious one that people can probably relate to is like so if I'm sending this data set to just some random stranger's computer, two issues come up immediately. One, how do I know that they're not cheating and they're actually giving me back the result that is genuine? And problem B, what if like that data set is comprised of personal identifying information, PII? I don't want to just send someone's like whole personal life to a stranger's computer. There's got to be a solution to that where we keep it encrypted. They can run the compute over it and then send the results back. So those are two very obvious problems that exist in this model that people are like working very hard to solve, and they seem to be succeeding. And we'll find out in the next 5 to 10 years if we are.
Interesting. So okay. So I didn't know this about how the Gridcoin platform works. So if I want to analyze a data set, then I'm just sending parts of that data set across the network of processing, or I guess processing units, or whatever you represent those in the Gridcoin network. So that data actually gets sent, or those pieces of data actually get sent to those units. So whether it be a remote control or a phone, it gets sent there.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And there's another issue with that, because like this works if the data set is small,
right?
If the little, we call them work units, the chunks of data we're sending across the network. As long as they're small, we can send them across the internet. We've got the tubes that are big enough to send this level of data, megabytes, maybe gigabytes. But we're making more and more data as a society, and specifically scientific data sets are getting huge. It's insane how big they're getting. And you can't, it's just physically impossible to send this data across the series of tubes that is the internet. You need to, like the way scientists move some of these big data sets is literally ship hard drives in boxes to where they need to go. You can't do that in a distributed computing network. Just ship someone some hard drives, do some compute on it, send it back. So the idea of compute over data is to reverse this method where instead of sending the data to people who will then use their compute to analyze that data, you're going to send the compute to where the data lives. And it's very interesting. There are some issues with it, but it looks like it's progressing in development. And it would completely just give us another way to do distributed computing and get more research done on a lot of different data sets.
That's really interesting. So essentially, well, have you seen, I guess, at this Compute Over Data Summit, so the conundrum then becomes, and I wonder if you've seen this there or if there's evidence of this. So essentially, you can have decentralization on both ends of the computational of the compute, right? So you can have the processing power, so the energy, or maybe the wrong term. I'm not a computer scientist, but the processing power distributed over a variety of tooling that powers that compute. And then on the other hand, that compute can then be moved to a either federated network or a distributed network of data. Is that possible? Or I guess no, it's not possible. That's the ultimate work, right?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily you're moving the compute, you're moving the algorithm to a more local environment.
Right. Yeah.
So there might be a good example. I've heard about this, and to be sure, I'm not a computer scientist either. Like this is one of the benefits of open source communities. I'm just coming here with my background, and I'm just participating in something I like to participate in. And in doing so, I'm standing next to some of the smartest computer scientists in the world, and you just learn from them through conversation. But the best example I've heard so far is like you could have a very large data set that's like petaflop or petabytes large, and you could end up running a simple filtering algorithm across it and reduce its size to like gigabytes. But in order to do that in the current distributed computing system, you would have to move the petabytes of data to all these people so they could run this filtering algorithm. What if you could just send the filtering algorithm to where that data was originally collected, run it there, reduce the size to like a gigabyte or two, and then do distributed computing across it? So it just seems like it can make it a little more efficient for some of these giant data sets.
It does. It's very interesting, and just for audience listening in and those who will be listening afterwards. So I think everyone's familiar with what a byte is as a unit of data. Um, a flop, I believe, is the equivalent for processing power. So it's like a watt.
You can think, yeah, you can think of it like that. It stands for floating operations per second.
Okay, cool. So that's really interesting. So it kind of begs the question in terms of who is orchestrating or coordinating what goes where. So on the Gridcoin platform, what sends out the bytes of data to these different processing units?
Oh man. Okay, so so Boink is we have two scoreboards essentially that we incentivize right now, Boink and Folding at Home, and we're looking into how we can incentivize more scoreboards. We want to incentivize things like Bakoyao and other maybe data storage networks as well. Because Gridcoin at its core is really just a protocol that mints a currency and distributes it to wherever we tell it to distribute it to based on our network's value set. And the network is just made of individuals. But to your question, so we have the two scoreboards, Boink and Folding at Home. Folding at Home is the easier example. It is just a project run by a team of people out of a university. I think it was started by Stanford, and I'm not sure if it's still there, but it's run by an institution. And that institution will talk to researchers who will provide the data set, the algorithms that they want to have run on this data. And then the institution will either accept or reject the proposal. And if they accept it, they upload it to the Folding at Home network, which then does all the technical stuff, the scheduling and so forth, gets the data out to the users on the network, who then crunch it and send it back to Folding at Home servers. And then they collect, aggregate all the results and send it back to the researcher in the first place. So that's a very centralized process controlled by people, individuals who are in positions of authority and power at this institution. So that's one way you can do it. Ultimately, it's the project who's making that decision. Boink is an infrastructure. Boink is a permissionless infrastructure. So anyone can make a Boink server, put their data on it, create an application that runs analysis over that data, and then just hook it into the infrastructure and convince people to contribute computations to it. And if they're successful in convincing people to contribute their computations to it, then they'll get their data crunched. If they're unsuccessful, then it will just sit there on the Boink infrastructure and no one will interact with it, and they won't get their data crunched. So that's Boink without Gridcoin, an open permissionless infrastructure of distributed computing. And there's actually people who run entire Boink projects on like laptops in their closet, alongside LHC at Home, CERN, who uses this infrastructure, World Community Grid, run by the Krembil Institute, started by IBM. The project, not the Krembil Institute, was started by IBM. So there's just citizen scientists and giant institutions. So what Gridcoin does is we can't incentivize every project, because if we did that, we might end up incentivizing a project that's trying to hack email passwords. And if we were doing that, I think our network would collapse because we'd be doing something illegal. Some of us would probably go to jail, and then no one would want to participate in this economic network, right? So we have to do our best to determine what, we're choosing ultimately what we think good science is, what is impactful research. And the way we do this is we have a conversation among our network, which is made up of scientists, professionals, and science enthusiasts, and basically everyone from all walks of life, just people. And we all learn about a project that started on the Boink network. Who are the people who are running it? What's the data they're doing? What sort of technical information can we learn about the project and how it does its work? And then we talk about it. Is this something we want to incentivize as a network? And then we have a vote across the network. So Gridcoin integrated or implemented a voting method. Like before, DAOs were could relate before there was even the idea of a DAO. We just vote across the network. It's a simple GUI interface, and your stake in a couple ways determines your voting power. And if that project is approved, then it's added to our incentivization layer, which once it's added, humans no longer are interfering with the process. It's just completely algorithmically driven, run by the computer code that runs the Gridcoin blockchain. So you have the BOINC project that's determining what data to submit to the users who then crunch it. And then you have, and that's just distributed computing in general across the board. And then you have Gridcoin, which adds a layer of choice on top of it, where the network determines which projects will be incentivized by our protocol. That was a lot. Does that make sense though?
Yes, it does. It does. It does.
Okay.
It's a multi-component ecosystem, and I think that's actually how things are ultimately going to go. I think there is the idea that people are trying. So maybe take a step back. The way that I'm seeing things develop in the decentralized science space, and I'm relating it back to Gridcoin, is it seems like you have small ecosystems that are kind of popping up that are in some ways being redundant in what they're trying to do, whether it be in the different components. And that's fine. It's good to have multiple variations of a theme. I think that's part of the nuance of having a decentralized open infrastructure, open framework. However, I think ultimately, and as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, a lot of these things are going to fail, and if not fail, then they're going to capitulate or implode because it doesn't make sense to be playing on an open playing or to be in an open playing field and people are doing redundant stuff, right? Let's start to get rid of this duplication of effort, and see what you can delegate off to other people who may have either done it faster, done it better, and plug into that, right? And see how that goes. And it seems like that's essentially the Gridcoin as one component of this compute over or this decentralized processing power behemoth of an entity is one example of that. So you have the incentivization layer, you have the governance perspective of that, you have BOINC, which is the delegation of where goes what, and then I imagine other like the projects themselves that get funded, or they get not funded but get processed, plug into that
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a good and interesting way to look at it. So you can add to that too. Like the primary goal of Gridcoin is to be an economics layer. It's tied deeply to distributed computing because distributed computations can be measured fairly simply. Like it's not accurate. It's not 100% accurate, but it's one of the easiest things to measure. And you see the rest of Web3 talking about reputation and all these intangible objects. And yes, it's incredibly important. We get to a point where we can measure those. But at least from my own belief, those are going to require what's called a web of trust. And web of trust are very difficult to create, to force. They have to emerge as technology around them enables them to emerge. And we're just not there yet. But we can already measure computation cycles. We already have infrastructures to do distributed computing. BOINC and folding at home are both ancient at this point. And so why not just start the economic system with what we can do easily? And we can do that on distributed computing. One day, it will be very easy to start distributing currency from our protocol to scientists who replicate research, or scientists who are doing cutting edge foundational research that can't get funded by a business, but is critical to a successful business operation because you got to replicate Alzheimer's research before you spend tens of billions of dollars trying to build medicines on top of it, just to make sure that foundational research isn't fake. So there's so many layers that you can build into your projects. And Gridcoin is an example, but I think a lot of people should start looking at it this way. If you look at your projects as economic systems and not as applications, these things that are using currency and game theory to get people to do what we want them to do. And then what we want them to do in a general sense is freaking science, and science replicate, experiment, get no results, and be rewarded for it. So absolutely, this multifaceted approach to how to build cryptocurrency networks is insanely valuable.
Very good. It's very nice. As I think about it, I think we definitely need more of a grid, like a graph a Gridcoin graph that we should circulate around the community as a whole, not for the participants, but for the actual builders in terms of look at this and see what is the simile, where does your protocol fit within the grander scheme of what decentralized science and open science is trying to achieve. And if you find yourself in the pocket of funding and finance, that's cool, that's no problem, that's great. We need that for the incentivization layer. But consider it to be that and not try not to like stretch it out, you know, narrative wise to be something more than it is. And instead plug yourself into a system that you can actually help push forward, right? I think the real power that we have here is composability. How can we create these
Absolutely.
really smart, niche things that all come together to create the supercomputer for science, um, that DeSci is trying to be and open science is trying to be. And I think that's a really nice way of actually framing it. And I haven't really, and you and I have spoken so many times. I haven't really thought about it in that same way. And I think that's very, very important. I think that's how I'm going to start talking, using my talks, defining it in my talks. Very, very cool. Awesome. So
Glad to continue enlightening.
yeah. One thing that I've been curious about, and I've gone through a little bit of the documentation with Gridcoin, I guess Boink in general, is how do I'm a participant, and I see Matt here, who's Arc in the audience. If Matt here wanted to, hook up one of his electronic units to contribute to this, how does that actually happen?
Sure. So you go to gridcoin.us and you follow the tutorial. But in a brief, in a brief couple of steps here, you're going to end up downloading the Gridcoin wallet, which is similar to a Bitcoin wallet. Frankly, with a better UI than most Bitcoin wallets, because some of our developers are purely focused on UI and they've made it beautiful. And you're going to install that, and then you're going to go to whatever you want to contribute to, whether it's Boink or Folding at Home, or if you're listening to this next year when we've integrated a couple more scoreboards, find the project, find the platform you want to get paid for participating in, and download that. So let's say you're doing Boink, so you download Boink, and then you follow Boink's tutorial, Boink's steps, and frankly, Boink is a very, very old behemoth of an application. It's a little confusing. But the tutorials, if you follow them to the T, will take you through it. And if something goes wrong, you can always come into Unity and figure it out. But once you download Boink, you register with the Boink project you want to contribute to. So maybe you want to do math research, maybe you want to do space research or medicine or climate change. You find a project that does one of those scientific fields, sign up for that. And then you do something called linking your CPID to your Gridcoin wallet, and that's called registering a beacon on the network. It's essentially a private public key pair that is human identifying. So you register your beacon with the Gridcoin blockchain, and then you set up your Boink settings to run however you want it. So you can have it set up to run 100% of the time. You can have it set up to run, after your mouse and keyboard are idle for like 60 seconds. So whenever you're away from your computer, you can have it set up to run whenever it's nighttime, or you can find out when electrical energy costs the least in your area and then have it run during those hours. Boink itself is very customizable in that way. And then once you're running, you go. And then there are more technical things regarding how to get your GRC that you've earned by contributing. But I won't get into that because join the community and ask about that. So ultimately, you'll get your rewards once you follow the steps I just outlined.
Awesome. It dawns on me, taking a step more back into the philosophical realm, that, I hear a lot of people talk about um, uh, shit. It's escaped my mind. Not passive income, but basic income.
Yeah, UBI.
UBI, there you go. UBI, universal basic income. So a lot of people
Yep.
talk about universal basic income and the advent of this and what is it going to look like. And there are a few protocols that exist in, I think, DeFi or something, and probably outside of the Web3 ecosystem as well, that are trying to do this. And they're doing this by launching a particular currency that will solve that or that will represent that. But I wonder if, much like how Gridcoin or how Boink/Gridcoin is operating, that this universal basic currency is actually an amalgamation of passive of I guess of remuneration for passive activity, right? Whether it be Gridcoin plus some other thing that is leveraging, passive income or passive activity, if that is not the better way of developing this universal basic income for participants. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. It is the better way, and it's not. So it you can think about the way the society is moving with technology in this way. Like the machines are going to be running most of this stuff, but the machines operate from data input. You can't just have an AI go, right? We need to, let's say it's a weather AI that's predicting the weather. It needs to detect the air pressure and the moisture all around the world from hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not even billions of sensors around the world if we really want to get super accurate with climate and weather prediction. And well, there's several point projects that are doing weather and climate prediction. And the way they do this is they collect the data from sensors all around the world, because you can run sensor projects. There's another sensor project that does radiation detection with Geiger counters. It's really, really interesting. The Geiger counters, when they produce them, sell out almost immediately because just like people love doing this radiation research. But the reality is we're all going to have computers all around us and sensors all around us all the time. We almost already do. Everyone in the Western world and most of the Eastern, everywhere has sensors in our pocket. We have cell phones. And if we can hook these cell phones into big data aggregators and get paid for providing that data, and then also use the processors in these sensors to do the computation on these projects, on this data, and get paid for that, then you start getting UBI based on production, based on input into a different type of society that's largely run by machines and AI. So it says humans, that it guarantees, or it works on the philosophy that machines are here to make life for humans easier. So they need to collect data from humans. So let's pay people for giving that input. That just sounds like a better UBI than let's just make a currency and distribute it to people. Let's make sure that people continue to contribute back.
Exactly. That is very good. And as we start to see, I think that the some of the I would argue that in decentralized science, as an industry itself, the two major fields or disciplines that have come to fruition or have established themselves are biomedical the biomedical niche, whether it be funding or data, and then the computational, and that includes AI. So being able to leverage one's processing power or the processing power of one's, toys and gadgets around the house, and as things become more IoT, then you'll have many, many more of these things, as well as, providing medical data, smartwatch data, what have you, if you choose to, and leasing that out and getting a return on that donation. It's not a donation really, but that contribution. Two very obvious ways to get passive income. And again, these all kind of amalgamate over time into what I think would be the ultimate form of a UBI. And as more of these things come online, as you get a climate check, weather or pollution sensor that you then plug in, and you get passive income from just having that on from the climate check ecosystem. As these other entities start to spin up their economic networks or the economies, that is when we're going to start seeing UBI. And we've kind of taken a far step away from Gridcoin to talk to UBI, but I think this is a very important simile within the Gridcoin ecosystem to how we hopefully will envision science and the rest of the world kind of playing out. And I think that's a very important thing to look at. We don't talk about that enough.
Absolutely, and there's another perspective that I've been thinking about a lot that I first heard from James Boyd from the Wolfram Institute on a podcast he did with the DeSci Foundation. And his perspective, I forget the exact phrasing he used, and it was, he has very good phrases, so I wish I could remember it word for word. But the essential idea is we are going to not be the people, the scientists are not going to be the people actually doing the work, the scientific work. What we're going to be doing is thinking about new questions and new inputs, and then giving that to machines who will then do the work, and then we get the data back, the results back, and we think about it in the way that only humans can. And machines are probably going to struggle to think like we do for some period of time, because brains are amazing. And so our job is going to be creative, to be philosophers, and not necessarily to be doers. And we should get paid for doing that. Like that is incredible. That kind of work is incredibly valuable.
Now, I will say that that as an ethos is actually tangible within the world. So if you go to the vast majority of I think biotech and pharma companies, industry companies, scientists are not actually, or formally trained scientists, which you reach a certain, I guess, hierarchy title, you're not actually doing the basic research, right? You have technicians, you have, you know, those participants that are actually doing it, and that's going to be, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective, taken over by robotics, AI-based robotics, or just robotics in general, doing the pipetting, doing the automate, the repetitive minutia of science. And I think that quote is what we're seeing there happen, but I think we need to see that in a way that is actually value producing to participants in the space and is not just extractive in nature and is not just pushing a for profit or profit over purpose, but just simulating that in a paradigm that is purpose over profit. And then you actually provide profit. You get to do good by being good. And I think ultimately that's what's really gonna, shift the paradigms, hopefully, in the relative.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Cool.
and it's interesting you bring that up because that's really the philosophy behind Gridcoin is like there's so Boink and folding at home have existed for decades, well before Bitcoin even existed, and people have been contributing, volunteering, or like I don't even know a word for it, reverse volunteering, because we pay electricity bills to contribute to these projects. So we're paying for the privilege to contribute to science, and people have been doing that for a very long time, and it reaches a plateau of people who are willing to do that. There are certain things that happen in the world that make people want to contribute more at a given moment or make people kind of forget about it at a given moment. So COVID-19 is a great example of all of a sudden everyone wants to contribute to protein folding because we want to destroy this virus. SETI at home was an example of people just getting energized by the idea of finding aliens. But the reality is most people sort of trail off after a little bit. So Gridcoin's thought is, well, what if we're able to tap into a more instinctive emotion versus this lofty, this guy, Eric Schultes, calls it a sixth sense of humanity, this idea of discovery, science as a sixth sense, which is a really interesting way to think about it. But instead of trying to tap into that and force everyone to experience this sixth sense, we're just tapping into greed, a very instinctive emotion. And so the idea is in order to make more money, you have to contribute to science. And the more you contribute to science, the more money you make. And the easiest way to start that system is with distributed computing, because again, it's easy to measure relatively, and the systems already exist. And that's a great way. We've been learning about it for like 10 years at this point, and I cannot wait until we can start plugging into other aspects of the scientific process to really start forcing people who just want money to get that money by doing science. And science ultimately benefits everyone in the world at the same time. So it's exactly what you're describing.
That's very interesting. I love to hear it. Rod, that's brought you up. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away
Yeah,
or comment.
yeah. Hey, nice to meet you. Just one comment. Foldit was a really interesting initiative, like gamification of Foldit. And I have a question with the Gridcoin. I have, let's say, I have computer fluid dynamics, but implemented the module for Godot engine. Could it be possible to somehow make the calculations like the model just relies on game engine? Is it possible to have a custom things that are not written on kind of smart contracts on Gridcoin?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What do you want?
I have models that need to be calculated.
Mm-hmm.
Those models implemented as a custom code, like on a variety of languages, but I can convert it into like a Docker container. Like I can run it in a
Gotcha.
Docker container, for example. So how is possible to do on Gridcoin
Yeah.
with
So
the custom?
this goes to the difference between like folding at home and Boink. So you can do it on Boink, but it would be more difficult to do it folding at home. And with the way you do it on Boink is you would read the admittedly horrible documentation. So the better way to do it would be come into the Boink and Gridcoin community and find the developers and people who can walk you through this process. But you end up setting up a Boink project, and then you get that project approved by the Gridcoin network. And once it gets approved, then it will be added to our incentivization layer. And once a project gets added to our incentivization layer, it's guaranteed a huge amount of computation because of the way our economics work. It's ultimately 1/n, the total processing power of the network gets distributed to each different project, excuse me, where n is the number of projects on the network. And that's just because of the way economics work. Now, the problem you might run into is if your required calculations are only going to last for like a week or two, because we do have a lot of computation power. We have something we call the hug of death. When the project's not ready for it and they get approved by our network, we crash their servers or we get their work done in like 2 hours. They're like, well, shit, what am I going to do with the rest of my grant? So if you don't have enough data to really make this a long running project, it might actually not be worth it for you to get plugged into the Gridcoin network, but you can still leverage Boink itself. And people will probably, if it's an interesting project, probably still contribute to it. We do have a couple ideas on how to, we're trying to make a couple projects out of the Science Commons initiative that will be for help projects who don't have a lot of data, help them plug into the Gridcoin network to get it crunched in like a couple hours instead of a couple weeks. But those don't exist quite yet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you. Pretty clear. I'm aware of Boink. I forgot like the name of the maintainer right now, but basically they've been on Gridcoin through the side initiative. Yeah, amazing project. Like when I was a student, my computer at my home was calculating something on Boink.
Yes, awesome.
So amazing project.
Yeah. And oh man, I wish, like you mentioned, schools, I think, and I wish we could get schools to get engaged with this process, like contribute their computer labs, because you can build like independent Boink environments for an institution. So you don't have an HPC at an institution, you just have every computer at that institution contributing to an HPC. And that like it just would reduce the line for an HPC drastically. It would get like one of the side effects of Boink and Gridcoin and all these distributed computing projects is like science communication and engagement. So if we can get like high schools or middle schools, or I don't know, wherever you are, so like K through 12, but pre-college, engaged in these things and having competitions like students versus teachers, choose your Boink project and contribute to it as best you can. And the winner gets like a scholarship or something. It'll be super exciting. And we're trying to build that with the SCI. So if that interests anyone, come help us out.
That's an actual great point. And Rod, thank you for asking your question. I guess to that point, to Rod's point, can any algorithm be leveraged with Boink, or is there specific languages? Are there certain limitations? I don't know if you can speak to that, John.
I don't know if I can either. I know the type of computation problem determines whether or not it will function in distributed computing in general. But I'm pretty sure if you can if your data can work in a distributed computing way, you can develop any application you want. You can analyze it with any language and have it operate. But I'm not technical enough to really know that. If anyone's super curious about it, join the community. There's plenty of people with a lot more technical expertise that who can answer that for sure.
I think the joining of that community, hold on, Rod. The joining of that community goes through, is it a Discord? You can just find it by clicking on the Gridcoin handle.
Yeah, you can. So it's Gridcoin Network on Twitter, or if you just go to gridcoin.us, there will be a bar at the top where you can find all the different community outlets. There's a couple Discord servers. There's a Science Commons Initiative, Boink Network, and Gridcoin Network. And if you just start participating, you'll find out where you got to be to get the best answer for your question.
Awesome. Rod, go ahead.
I just can answer on that question. As it's built on Boink, I know for sure that it's possible to do. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can do any calculations. Of course, you have to make to make the right pipeline to make it in a decentralized way. But in principle, it's possible. I know that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. So last couple minutes, just to speak to the degens out there, the questions coming. So GRC, which is the Gridcoin coin token, um, beyond its monetary value, I guess it's less degenerate, really. What functionality does it have? Is there any governance rights in terms of it can be staked? You made reference to before you can stake, like there's some staking,
Mhm.
not of the token, but some asset value that you can stake in terms of determining what happens. Does that involve the GRC? Or what else can it do?
Sure. So I'll talk degen. If you are a degen, I'm sure you understand how Bitcoin works. It's ultimately an economic translation of electrical energy into a utility, and that utility is securing the blockchain. The more electrical energy you provide to this economic network, the more you are likely to get paid. So Gridcoin is similar in that sense. We have that layer one. It is proof of stake, so you use GRC to secure the blockchain, and you get rewards for that. That is a small portion of the rewards you get. The greater portion of the rewards that become mints goes to people contributing the computation cycles to these scientific research projects. The things you use the GRC for are similarly to Bitcoin. Sorry, is you have to use GRC in order to interact with the Gridcoin blockchain, and then we have that voting mechanism which lets you determine which projects get approved to be integrated with our incentivization mechanism, and the vote weight of each individual is determined by two factors. One is the number of GRC that you have, and two is this thing we call magnitude. And magnitude is a very, very, very cool translation of the computation cycles you contribute to these computation projects. So without getting into the details of magnitude, it's essentially the more you contribute to these computation projects, the more magnitude you have. So if you have a high amount of GRC and a high amount of magnitude, you have a higher voice in the voting mechanism than someone who has a lower amount of GRC and a lower amount of magnitude. On top of that, we're developing these things called benefactor contracts. There was a talk at the COD conference about these actually by Jim, who's our lead developer, and these are going to be very, very cool. And we don't have time for me to describe them all the way through, but ultimately you use GRC to lock it into a contract behind a computation project you want to see have their work done. And in doing so, you actually get a reward at the other end if that work gets done. And there's a lot of intricacies into how these contracts might work that is very, very exciting to explore because it's a new financial tool. It's similar to setting up a CD at a bank or taking out a loan from a bank or doing all these things you can do with banks. But we're doing it with blockchains that can be run algorithmically through an open source set of code. And it's going to be integrated to the system of science instead of this arbitrary system of debt that we created X number of years ago to try and, I don't even know what debt's trying to do, but it's starting to fail. So we need a new system. Beyond that, we have a lot of interesting ideas on how to use GRC. They will take a significant amount of development, and we don't have a huge amount of development resources. Granted, we are one of the longest standing coins in the ecosystem and have had continuous development since our generation in 2013. But if we want to see them happen, if we want to see these really cool economics ideas about how to fund science and get science accelerated, we're going to need more help building the code to make it happen. So if this is stuff that interests you at all, please just come in, start a conversation, see if it's a community you want to get involved with, a project that you can get behind, a passion of yours. And we have some of the friendliest people in the community. Frankly, we get that very often in terms of this is a fun community to join. So hopefully you'll find a place and you can help us build this thing.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Speaking of that, actually, how wide is your community? Are you guys distributed around the world?
Oh yeah, we're huge. So okay. We have, I think last we checked, it was either 3,000 or 5,000 staking nodes across the world. I'm just going to say 5,000 because it's a bigger number, but it was it was one of those at one time and the other at the other time. We have tens of thousands of people plugged into the network doing distributed computing and getting rewarded for it. We have, unfortunately, the developer aspect of the community is actually very, very low, but it also means you have a great opportunity of actually getting into a core development position And we do have GRC set aside as a community to help pay developers who contribute to the project. So if you believe in the project, you'll get paid in GRC, and then continue to contribute to it. And the network effect will take it from there, basic blockchain economics. And the active community is probably several hundred people daily engaging. You know, Reddit's fairly large, Twitter's over 10,000. And we have a lot of people who are super interested in what we're doing. And we just need folks to help us build it a little more. But it is one of the largest like technical communities in the blockchain space. We have a lot of nodes securing the blockchain.
I mean, you guys have the longevity for it, right? You guys have been around for so goddamn long.
It's the crazy part, man. Like, yeah,
it's insane. But it seems like that has given. I don't know if the infrastructure itself was there as we spoke about it from the inception. But I think as it at the very least, I'm sure as time has moved on, you guys have had the opportunity to refine these interoperable aspects and
oh my god,
what doesn't work.
So Rob Halford, that pseudonymous guy, great idea, horrible coder. And so the code was completely completely rewritten by Jim in like 2017 and 2018, and we've integrated some new really cool tools, side staking. We have a treasury system that's like integrated, and we're continuing to build on it. We have this thing called manual rewards claim, which makes us a zero cost entry proof of stake blockchain, which is insane. That doesn't exist anywhere else. And there's been so many cool things integrated, and this community just persists through like 3 or 4 bear markets at this time. And it doesn't go away because people are so passionate about it. It's just like, there's no reason this coin should still exist, but it's such a good idea and it's starting to function very, very well. People just aren't leaving.
DeSci, hear me very well. Listen to John. That is the testament of the value of your platform. Please take a good look at how Gridcoin and Boink and this ecosystem has formed itself, because that's what you want to emulate in making sure that your ecosystem that you're trying to build propagates and it has sustainability across a variety of both market conditions, but also just macro world conditions. I think Gridcoin stands as a testament of what we are actually looking to bridge. So congratulations to you, John, in being a part, one member of that gigantic community. Thank you for sharing this. One thing I would like to say is we have put together the DeSci Belgrade conference, which is a free conference for those who want to travel to Belgrade and participate. And the whole goal is to help showcase DeSci outside of necessarily the Web3 space, but to the local community and help nucleate a DeSci community within Belgrade. We've been super welcoming. We want to show off a lot of our friends and a lot of the platforms in the space. So John, if you want to circulate that notion, or I'll send you the website or whatever in the Gridcoin community. And if there's anybody out there in Eastern Europe that wants to come and speak on behalf of Gridcoin, we'll have poster presentations as well. So they can send a poster and we'll put it up in our poster area and just kind of showcase what Gridcoin can do. There's a very, very hungry population or demographic or group of participants in Belgrade, both in industry, in academia, and just scientists all around that want to know about these things. So you guys are more than welcome to come and participate. We'd love to have you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll pass it around to the community. And thanks so much for everything the DeSci world is starting to do to get the DeSci movement a little more global, a little more inclusive, and give it some energy that it desperately needs at this time. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's a communal effort. So cool. So guys, this has been a great conversation with John again. John, I hope we'll have you back. I'm sure we will. DeSci Labs has yet to have its own conversation, and I'm more than happy to have you and Carla and Eric and whoever else on to talk about this again. So please do ping them for that.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, guys, make sure to follow John himself, but also Gridcoin, contribute where you can. Participate in the community, help it grow. Check out DeSci Belgrade if you want to come. If you're a project, we'd love to have you. Rod, this extends to you as well. More than happy to show off Lunco. Everybody's welcome to participate. And I think that's it. So without further ado, we'll close the space. Everybody have a great weekend and tune in, because in a half an hour, we're having our episode of DeSci Peaks, which is going to focus specifically on how do we help onboard more scientists into the decentralized science space, or I guess more into open science via DeSci. That's going to be a great conversation with John and I, Ned Horning, and Lindsay Cameron. And then the first part is going to be a 30-minute roundup of what's been going on in DeSci over the last month or the month of April. So if there's any news you want to share, anything you want to come in, Rod, I know you launched a new asset for Lunco, so you're more than welcome to come over and talk about that, jump on stream. But that'll be at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, so in about 23 minutes. And yeah, so Rod, I'll unmute you. Make it brief because John has to go walk his dog before he comes and sets up for DeSci.
Yeah, I'll try to attend. I'm not sure it's a bit late, but yeah, thanks. I just want to say amazing initiative with Belgrade. Unfortunately, I won't be able. My brother that I haven't seen for 1.5 years will come to Thailand, but I'm really happy. I hope that you will have another event somewhere, and definitely I'll be there. Thanks for the invitation, and also I'll try to promote the event like on all the channels that I have. I really like support your initiative with the events. We need more offline events.
I appreciate it, Rod. All right, cool, guys. So without further ado, closing out the space. Have a great weekend for those of you who've been listening, Matt and Alustis. And we'll see you guys next week for another episode of DeSci Rising. Take it easy, everybody. Bye.
Bye.